In the Unitarian Universalist ministers tradition, we have a thing we call Odyssey. And at the end of a long tenure of ministry, you might sit down with a group of colleagues in a circle. I imagined if we could make you in a circle and thought, no, there'll probably be too many people for that today. And you tell the story of your life. And what led you? Where did you come from? And one of the things we talk a lot about here is how important it is to tell our stories and get to know each other. So as the years have gone by, most of what I'm going to say, many of you have heard pieces of. It's never been all put together in one piece. And I hope that you will enjoy with me kind of hearing my story and what we call our Odyssey. I'm going to begin at where my professor at ILF, Vincent Harding, would call the beginning. Vincent Harding was with Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement, wrote a number of books, helped with editing Eyes on the Prize, and was truly an amazing, amazing mentor. He would begin every class at the beginning of a year saying to you, give me or think of your mother's mother's maiden name. For me, that was Leela Parker. And she was my grandmother and someone I called Mima. She was of German Jewish and Irish Catholic descent. Somehow or another, two people like that finding one another in Georgia. Good laughing about that because I can only imagine what that would have been like at the turn of the century, trying to be Catholic or Jewish. And as they migrated and landed in Louisiana and eventually in Texas, guess what? They became Southern Baptist. However, in thinking about this important piece of heritage, I began, when I was in seminary, to think of myself as still technically Jewish, because Judaism is passed down through the mothers, and therefore my daughters also technically Jewish. Claim that, even though there is absolutely no trace of it, except for how much food we cook. I was born in Odessa, Texas, which is in West Texas, and we moved to 4 different places by the time I was the age of 4. But my parents divorced, and I never saw my father again. My mom moved back in with her mother, my Mima, and we were poor. I didn't know we were poor, except that I only got shoes for Christmas, which I didn't care that much about shoes. But I know that we were, and it's given me incredible grounding over the years and what it means to cross class barriers and deal with classism in so many of our institutions. Because of the nature of my young life and all those moves, my brother and sister were literally born in different towns, El Paso and Laredo. Then we were in Santa Fe, and then we were back in Odessa. Life was a bit chaotic among the adults, and so I became extremely aware of all the adults around me and very super sensitive to what was going on with them. I remember once when I was about 6 years old, sitting in this old rocking chair that belonged to my grandmother, and I remember both my mother and my grandmother saying, "Look at her, she's like a little granny." And I was, like a little granny. What I really was is what is sometimes known as an empath, able to literally feel things in people, feel what's going on in a room, feel what's going on with someone else most of the time, can't read your thoughts, but can feel what's going on. That's been a blessing and a curse. It's been a great gift in ministry, and also a curse because I don't always know that it's not me feeling angry or upset. I have to figure that out. So if you come at with me with strong emotion, I may think I'm that way in this very moment, and then I will finally figure it out and be able to hear better. This is so much the case that I actually remember a story of asking my grandmother when I was 7 if she was lonely. And I asked that because not soon after we moved in with my grandmother, my grandfather died, my mother's father. And it occurred to me at the age of 7 that my grandmother must be lonely. All she ever did was wash dishes and garden in her yard. I remember the funny look she gave me. And I think that look was, I can't believe the 7-year-old is asking me that. But she said no, and I do remember that. I've told the story many times of sitting beneath the peach trees behind a little house in my grandmother's backyard and feeling at the age of 6 or so that the Spirit of God was there. I was in a Southern Baptist church, and I had heard that God loved all the little children of the world, and it occurred to me that I was one of them, and I felt that Spirit say that I am loved. And for that reason, all my life I've believed in something more. And I even have said, and it is true, it saved my young heart to know I was so loved. I was also a writer at a very young age and wrote a book of poetry for my mother about the age of 8 and bound it with little bread twisties in one of those metal gravy packets. It wasn't very pretty, but those were my first poems. I left the Southern Baptist Church when I was about 13. My parents did not make me go to church, and they were not religious. I was one, and I told someone this even yesterday, one of those weird kids that really wanted to go to church and wanted to read the Bible and actually have read the Bible, especially the children's Bible twice. But I left that church because I heard in my youth group that whatever you do, don't date a Catholic or a Jew. I didn't even know that was my heritage. But, of course, I married 2 Catholics, and I left that church. I tried a Methodist church for a little while, but found it to be, quote-unquote, too social and not serious enough. Sorry, I've always been like this. And I went through my young adult years without any church or any religion, and I remember imagining, as I walked beneath the pecan trees on the University of Texas at Austin campus, that God probably no longer loved me and that I was probably a great disappointment. I was the first girl in my family, as far as I know, to go to college. And I entered the University of Texas thinking I was going to be a psychiatrist. And I was pre-med my first year. And if you know anything about really large schools, there were over 300 young people in freshman chemistry. And my second semester, I missed making a B by 3 points on a 600-point grade scale. I figured I would never make it to med school, and really, what was I thinking? I'm not very good at math. How am I going to do that? And so I became a honors liberal arts student at the University of Texas and met the editor of the newspaper and started working on their newspaper. Never taking a journalism class, but becoming a journalist. In 3 years, working in a capital city, you do learn a lot about how to write and how to report, and it was high times. I met Sarah Weddington, and Lloyd Doggett was just starting out. When I graduated, I got a job at the Bryan College Station Eagle, which, if you know anything about Texas, is the home of Texas A&M. Yeah, and I found out how seriously those Aggies took people from UT. I was driving around a little orange VW Bug, and oh my gosh, they were really serious about that football stuff. I covered everything from the police beat to the courthouse to mental health, poverty, huge project on poverty in the Brazos Valley, which is the second poorest region of Texas, and the Texas prison system, including a visit to death row, where I got out. While I was there, I eventually married who was the city editor, Robert Schwab, and before we left, I became the editor of the editorial page and had a lot of fun writing what I thought, really thought, instead of what I reported on. Often with my baby, Catherine, going to work with me on Saturday mornings, sitting there, laughing and crying, and making me hurry. If you know anything about the newspaper business, you know that in the 80s, the bottom fell out with the cost of paper. Our little paper was bought up by some company, and we lost our jobs. And my husband got a job at the Denver Post, and so we came to Denver when Catherine was about 1.5. And I tried to find a job in journalism, but I couldn't. They wouldn't hire me at the Post because of nepotism, and the Rocky Mountain News wouldn't want me because, well, he works at the Post. So anyway, I decided to take some time out and have another baby, Rebecca, and to raise my children. And spend really time on that for 5 to 6 or 7 years. Time I do not regret. So during that time when they were very little, we found the First Universalist Church of Denver. and that was my first church. We joined in 90 or 91, and for the first time in my life, being from West Texas, which is, we can have a competition on where the most conservative place in the world is, but it would be in the top 10. I didn't even know there was such a thing as liberal religion. It never ever occurred to me that that was a real thing. And when we found this church, it was like everything I really cared about was right there in the principles and purposes. All those long articles on health and mental health and how we treat prisoners, how we deal with poverty or don't deal with poverty. So it was an amazing thing to find a liberal church for me. And I didn't even know I'd been a liberal. I probably was a liberal from the time I was 4. So, and I also had never seen a woman minister. And I went to leadership school and for the first time saw 2 all at once. And later, I was talking to a friend about going to seminary here, ILF, which is a liberal Methodist school. And in talking with her, I thought, wow, maybe I could be a minister. I really love philosophy. I'm a writer. I love talking with people. I love sitting and discussing people's problems, and it seemed kind of possible. And so I did. When Rebecca entered first grade, I started seminary, and it was 4 years of work. And that entire time, I can assure you that anyone had come up to me and said, "What do you think you are doing?" I would have said, "I have no idea, and I'm going to change paths." Or if they would have said to me, "You can't be a minister," I would have believed them. I was listening for anything to get in the path of me becoming a minister, but at the same time, I was listening with an open heart and hoping that I had found a place to be. So I came to Prairie in August of 1999. And for those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago and I talked about the story of our church and its history, you know that I came by chance and simply because I knew ministers here and this church was looking for somebody, and I was available, and we spent the first 5 years working together and getting a grant from the UU, Unitarian Universalist Association, and then I was called. I felt that my call to ministry was justice work and community building. One of the things about seminary, it makes you name what it is you're trying to do and why. And that, I think, has been lived out through my 20 years, and I think it's embedded in the DNA of this church as well. I wanted to just name a few favorite memories. And before I do that, I also want to remember something that struck me in the last week. How just before I came, there was Columbine. And there we are at the end, and there's the STEMS shooting. And in the middle and earlier was 9/11 and the Aurora Theater. And I think that as horrible and difficult as all those things are, it really teaches you why you might be in a church and why you need a community and how there are things that are simply too big for us to be alone with. So when I think of my favorite memories, one of my very favorite memories is our huge turnout we used to have at Pride Fest, and how we have those yellow t-shirts which really look terrible on just about everybody. But Prairie started the whole theme of UU churches wearing colored t-shirts, and we really embraced yellow. It might look good on someone, I don't know. But and we also came out in strength for the Standing on the Side of Love services for gay pride and also racial justice. And those were really proud moments when we left this building and became something else. And now you're practicing it every month, leaving this building and becoming something else, doing something of love in the community, which is just about the proudest thing I can see. And I cannot believe the energy that you have put into that. I also have loved all of our incredible holiday services over the years. Michael and I were remembering how many turkeys I used to cook for Thanksgiving, at least 3, and how I now don't have to bring any. All the weird costumes I wore on Halloween. My favorite was Walden Pond. I don't think I looked anything like Walden Pond, but it was so much fun. I came as Thomas Jefferson once. Didn't look like him at all either. But my intern supervisor, Nan Hobart from First Unitarian, would have been very proud of me because she said to me, of course, You got to do some play. You got to show them you can play a little bit. Come on, you can do it. And I did, every single Halloween. And I don't know if that'll stay as a tradition, but it was a lot of fun. And our New Year's burning services, our Christmas Eves, our Easters, our egg hunts, just everything over the years that binds a community together through worship and ritual and memories and things that we don't want to miss. And then finally, when I think of and this is going to be counterintuitive perhaps, but one of my favorite memories of Prairie is how incredible this community comes together when there is a death among us. I counted through my files, and I've led 27 memorial services. And as many of you know, and it was referenced in candles, there were 5 2 years ago between March and July. Alan Duke, Paul Kenningham, Scott Barr, Jerry Hill, and Norm McQueen. And every time Paul played Ashaken Farewell, as he did for his parents and for Susan's father and so many other people over the years. And I went to Arizona and did the service for Scott. Gail and Scott had moved, and it was beautiful to be with them in such a time of sorrow. Things I've learned. I really mean this, even though I fail at it often. Don't sweat the small stuff. You know, if you talk to me on Sunday, I am failing at that almost on a regular basis. But really, whether the piano is moved across the hall or not, or the lights are the right way, and honestly, I even mean, even if the budget is acting up and difficult to make things match up from year to year. Has there ever been a year when it was perfect? If you sweat that every single year, you're going to spend all your time sweating that. And we have so much else to do. We have music to make. We have celebrations. We have joy to build. We have children to raise. We have so much more to do than sweat the small stuff. I'm working on it. This is not an example of this either. Listen more than you talk. But I have learned to listen more than I talk. Write as many cards as you can. Okay, you can't get to the hospital every time. You can't find a casserole. You don't have the energy to pick up the phone. Write a card. Don't get mad in email. The stupidest things happen when you get mad in email. It's really tragic. Yeah, you can tell a mile away, they're mad. But anyway, and this brought to mind something I don't know how you're going to feel about. But in these 20 years, I've only lost my temper twice. And one time the person didn't know I had lost my temper. So it mustn't have been very dramatic. And the other time I did not apologize. I'm not going to say more. I do have some limits. And finally, and this is mostly for those of you who do our pastoral care and are really present so much, there's a sense of you're always on. And this brought to me mind in talking with Michael how that might include your whole family. And back in the day of landlines, people would call, and some of you talk a lot. And Michael would answer the phone, and he would say, "Jann is not here." That would not stop you. You went on and on about what the problem was. And then he would say, "Can I help you with your taxes?" No? Well, I'll let Jann know you called. There are 3 areas, and I'm going to wrap up, I promise, and this is where it might get a bit sermon-y. As a matter of fact, they say that most ministers have one sermon that they just say over and over again. And I think I have 3. 3. Whew. What if it were 30? I think I have 3, and these are also the areas where I have learned the most and grown the most. And I wanted to share them with you, and they're not going to be surprises, because you've heard a little bit on this over the years. The areas for me are justice work, community, and faith. And I want to begin by saying in justice work, just because some of you don't know this and others of you do, but I spent 15 years serving on the Colorado Council of Churches and was the chair of the Justice Commission for 10 years. I was 15 years with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, 9 years as president, the sigh is for today, and working on 3 different ballot initiatives over those years to keep choice in place for women. And also doing a silent protest at a doctor's home right up here near the mosque, who had for 10 years had the pro-life people showing up every Saturday, every Mother's Day, every Easter with their big banners and their trucks and their megaphones yelling outside of his house. He didn't tell anyone because he had a little boy, and when the boy turned about 10, he let us know. And we began a silent protest against that in front of his house, and the Arapahoe County Commissioners changed the laws so that you had to be a certain distance and couldn't, protest right in front of a home like that. I spent 8 years on something called Eco-Justice Ministries and was 6 years the president. And this is an ecumenical group with Peter Sawtelle, for those of you who've heard that name, trying really hard to help Christian churches understand the environment and all the bad stories that do come from the Hebrew Bible that teach us that the earth is ours to rule as we will, or at least it's been interpreted that way. I gave up on that, by the way. It was just exhausting. And I was proud of the fact that Unitarian Universalists were way ahead of that curve. And then the last 5 years, I've been very active with Together Colorado. I was on the core leadership team, Transforming Justice, which works on criminal justice issues and racial justice. And 3 years ago, we ran Amendment T to take the exception of slavery out of the ballot, and it barely lost. And then this past fall, we passed Amendment A, a much better letter. And we took the exception to slavery out of the Colorado State Constitution, and that's something that we hope will happen nationwide to the 13th Amendment. So I quit doing all that justice work in January. I can tell you it was exhausting. Every legislative session, every election, there was always something. But I learned that the way you do justice work is to show up and keep showing up and keep attending those meetings and keep being patient and walking humbly with your God so that no one thinks that this is a contest between religions and faiths, but something that we can do together across faiths. And then also, this is the first place I really learned that you need to tell your story and you need to help others tell their stories, because that's when the stories come out and you learn whose families were slave owners and whose families were slaves. And hear that struggle so that you can build common bonds. I want to just quickly add that I also have been very committed to my profession and served 4 years on the UU Ministers Association Board and Education Committee and helped develop a program to help seminarians become ministers, which has from Denver gone nationwide within our faith. Next area, this is your favorite thing to talk about, is community. What it means to stick together through thick and thin, to stay at the table even when you disagree, to take the covenant to heart, and learning to truly appreciate and accept differences, which is really hard. Most of us, if we're honest, including myself, we really just want everyone to be just like me, and not a challenge to get to learn and know. And I have to say that over the years in this area of community building, I have been proudest of those who identify as Republican, or Christian, or pagan, and hanging in there and creating a church that really sees difference. And finally, our faith, which is very important to me. I came to think after I left the Council of Churches that Unitarian Universalism is a separate faith from our Christian and Jewish roots. I spent all that time on the Council of Churches, which I love to this day, and love Adrian Miller, who runs it now, wanting the Unitarian Universalists to be full members of the Council instead of associate members, because we won't take and say the creed that we believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It didn't work. They wanted to keep the identity of their full members definitely Christian, with lots of space for other people to be associate members, which is awesome. But for me, I thought, no, I'm done. And then I thought, well, maybe this Unitarian Universalism isn't really Christian, really, anymore. And for those of you who've been listening, you know what I think. I think this is a mystic tradition, that it has roots in transcendentalism and Emerson and Thoreau, in an idea of a God in both our Unitarian and Universalist side that would never send someone to hell for wrong belief, that would never not love us no matter what, that would never not be with us no matter what, and that isn't some kind of super manager that comes in and does things to one group and not to the other group. That is not my vision of God, and it's a mystic vision of God, and I believe that's what the Transcendentalists were talking about, and those are our roots, and that is where we have the capacity to build a faith that is so large, it's such a huge umbrella for those who want to be outside the orthodox box, who want to see if we can strive for justice together. And I believe with Theodore Parker and Martin Luther King Jr. that the arc is indeed long, but it bends toward justice. So I grew in my faith in this church. I grew in my commitment to justice in this church. I became completely aware and believing in community in this church. And it's not because of me, it's because of you. All the things I have seen you do over the years, all the care you have, all the experiments you've tried, how hard you've worked to be who you are, how beautiful you are. And I will end by simply saying, I will always love you. Every one of you, even if I don't know you, your hearts will be with us. And you have changed my life profoundly, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.